We are back with a brand new video. In today's video, I'm going to be previewing the Los Angeles Lakers offseason. We're going to be starting a series where we start to preview every team's offseason. If you guys are interested in this type of series, let me know in the comment section below. But leave a like, subscribe, and yeah, comment down below what you guys are interested in, if you guys agreed with my takes or not. But let's get right into it, man. So as you guys can see right here, we're doing the Los Angeles Lakers. We're going to start off with some of the positives and negatives from last season. So from last season, you know, it was an up and down year for the Lakers. They ultimately finished in the play-in, outside the play-in, and they missed the playoffs completely with the 11th seed in the West. So not really a good season for the Lakers, but there were some positives. One big positive was that LeBron James still looks really, really good at age 37, and that's something that you need. You know, there was a lot of discussion about whether LeBron, you know, when would LeBron fall off a cliff, and he hasn't done that. And for the Lakers, it's been a very good sign for them and Lakers fans, because LeBron is still playing at an elite level, MVP type level, at age 37. Now, you also have had some nice bright spots and sparks here and there from guys like Austin Reeves, who was an undrafted signing from last season, who's a rookie, and Malik Monk, who was a guy that signed with the Lakers in free agency on a minimum contract, and he really played well for them, and he showed why he's gonna be a coveted piece in free agency, not just for the Lakers but for other teams as well. So those two were really bright spots for the Lakers. And then Stanley Johnson, you know, who ultimately did not live up to his expectations in Detroit. He found a role in the Lakers, playing a nice 3-and-D Swiss Army knife type role and doing a lot of dirty work for the Lakers. There were not too many positives for the Lakers last year, but you know, if anything, you can rely on your young players like Austin Reeves, Malik Monk, and Stanley Johnson, who really took nice jumps last season into becoming rotational pieces who can really contribute on a championship level team, supplementing that with LeBron James's elite level skill at age 37. There were some positives for the Lakers last season, but some of the negatives were as follows. Number one, Anthony Davis's health. Anthony Davis has been a guy who's been touted as injury prone for a while now, and it hasn't really stopped. And you know, he's been a guy that a lot of Lakers fans and NBA fans in general have been frustrated by, because you know, he'll be back and then he'll be out again for 3 weeks. It's a bunch of knick-knack injuries here and there. His health is still a question mark, a big question mark. Now, no one is questioning what Anthony Davis can do if he can stay healthy. He's a top 10 player in the league when he's healthy, but his health has been a big question mark for a lot of people, and last season it was more of the same. So the health of Anthony Davis was one big negative. Number two, Russell Westbrook's fit. You know, this has probably been the biggest talking point of the Lakers ever since they got Russell Westbrook, was, you know, the fit of Russell Westbrook. How is it going to work? You know, a lot of people didn't expect it to become a seamless fit, because we know Russell Westbrook is not a floor spacer, and you need floor spacers around LeBron. It didn't work last season, and we'll see what they do about it this season, whether they move on from him, whether they stick with him. But his fit on the Lakers was questionable. Kendrick Nunn's injury, you know, this was a guy that signed from the Heat, and he was looking to play. He signed on a minimum contract, or like 1 year, $5 million contract with a player option, and he missed the whole season. And you know, a lot of people are making jokes about it, but I really don't know what's going on with Kendrick Nunn, whether he's, you know, his injury is as bad as what it seems, or whether it's just a precautionary thing. But he missed the whole season, and obviously the team's record was not ideal. This is a team that had championship aspirations. A lot of people were predicting them to even win the championship last season, and they completely missed the play, and they completely flopped. Now, a lot of people would have said, what if X, Y, or Z was healthy? Well, like, even when they were healthy, I didn't really see them clicking on full cylinders. So it was just a bad season overall for the Lakers last year. Getting into what decisions they have to make in the offseason. Number one is, what do they do with Russell Westbrook and Talen Horton-Tucker? These two guys are, if you ask me, who is most likely to get traded from the Lakers, it's 1A and 1B here. It's, you know, it's one of these two, or both of them potentially, to get traded. Because Talen Horton-Tucker is a guy that they could have moved a couple seasons ago, or I think last season before this one, at the deadline, and they did not. They stayed pat, and he's a guy that a lot of people expected to take a jump, and he hasn't really done that. You know, he's probably their biggest young asset to move on from, and if they want to contend for a championship, he pretty much has to go, in my opinion. Now, Russell Westbrook, it's interesting because I've seen reports from The Athletic and stuff like that saying that Russell Westbrook, the Lakers are probably going to keep Russell Westbrook. Contrary to reports saying that they might trade him, because they've been asking coaches about what would they do with Russell Westbrook in their interviews, like Darvin Ham and Kenny Atkinson and Terry Stotts, these guys. And speaking of those coaches, you got to make a decision as to what coach you want to hire after firing Frank Vogel. Now, I'll get to what coach I think they should hire in the later slide, but you do have to make that decision. It's narrowed down to, like I said, 3 coaching candidates, and probably only 2, because I think only Darvin Ham and Terry Stotts made it to the second round of interviews. But Kenny Atkinson was also a name that Woj mentioned, so I'm going to throw him in there. But yeah, you got to figure out what coach you want to hire. You got to figure out what to do with Russ and THT. You also got to figure out, if you want to trade into the draft or not, because you guys don't have a pick. You do not have a first or a second round pick this year, and you do have to figure out if you want to trade into the draft or if you want to stick and sign with the guy who's undrafted. And I do think they should stick with the guy who's undrafted, find a rookie who's undrafted. I think you can find a lot of deep end talent this year. I do have a list of names that I will get to that the Lakers could look into if they're not drafted, but I do think that you should try to figure out if you can sign a guy who's undrafted after the draft this year, like you did with Austin Reeves last season, and turned out really well for you. It was one of your biggest positives for last season. Do you re-sign Stanley Johnson, Carmelo Anthony, and Dwight Howard? That's another question that you have to answer as well. So they do have some decisions to make, the front office of the Lakers. The front office has made some questionable moves over the past couple years, but with after hiring a new coach, I do see that the Lakers will bounce back from last season once they figured out all these other stuff as well. But yeah, those are the decisions that the Lakers have to figure out, what to do with. As far as potential Russ and Taylor Horn-Tucker trades, I do have one trade that I've looked at with Russell Westbrook and Taylor Horn-Tucker. Now, this is a trade that sends Russell Westbrook to the Hornets, and this is actually a 3-team deal that sends Russell Westbrook and Mo Harkless to the Hornets, as well as a 2027 first-round pick, which is one of the only first that the Lakers have. But that's lottery protected, so if it's a lottery pick, it goes back to the Lakers. If not, it stays with the Hornets. And in return, the Kings get Kelly Oubre Jr. as well as Taylor Horn-Tucker from the Lakers. And then the Lakers receive Richaun Holmes, Gordon Hayward, and Justin Holiday. Now, let me break down this trade piece by piece. Now, the biggest attraction for the Lakers is obviously Gordon Hayward. Now, Gordon Hayward's contract is pretty hefty, and some could argue that it's even a worse contract than Russell Westbrook's because it's guaranteed for 2 seasons. But I do think that the fit of Gordon Hayward on the Lakers is a lot better than the fit of Russ on the Lakers because of Gordon Hayward's floor spacing and shot creating ability off the dribble. On top of that, you get a guy who can space the floor and also defend in Justin Holiday, who I really like for the Lakers, and a young center who I think would fit really well next to Anthony Davis and Richaun Holmes, who's expressed frustrations being in Sacramento. And there's been some rift there. There's been some drama there that people have reported with Richaun in Sacramento. So I think he's probably gone. As far as the Kings are concerned, you send away Mo Harkless, Richaun Holmes, who you're probably going to trade anyway, as well as Justin Holiday. Not really the biggest assets in my opinion. You get 2 good pieces. I think Kelly Oubre is a good young piece for the Kings. He's only about 25, 26. THT is only about 21, 22. So you have 2 guys who I do think fit your timeline there. I think the Kings could really entertain doing this deal. Now, the Hornets is interesting. Obviously, the fit of Russell Westbrook on the Hornets is pretty questionable, but I would say that if you are the Charlotte Hornets, you can look to either buy him out or just let him, decline his player option after this season. It's basically a trade to get off of Gordon Hayward's big contract, and that's something that the Hornets, in my opinion, have to do. So we'll get to the Hornets offseason preview in a different video, but I do think that the Hornets will have to get rid of Gordon Hayward sooner or later. You get Mo Harkless, who's like an expiring deal in a couple of years, not worth that much, and a first-round pick, which could essentially turn out to be yours if it doesn't end up being in the lottery. So I do think that if Russ and THT were to get traded in the same package, I would really like this trade. Now, I don't know if Russ is going to get traded or not. Like I said, there's been reports that they might keep him or they might move him. But I definitely think that THT is a guy that the Lakers should try to trade to get maximum value for, especially because he's a young piece that a lot of teams would love. Moving on to the draft. Like I said, the Lakers do not have a pick this year. But there are some undrafted rookies that or potentially undrafted rookies that I do think that the Lakers can go out and get. Now, obviously, I don't know who's going to get drafted and who's not out of all these guys, but looking at a lot of big boards and stuff like that, I've seen a lot of these guys fall out of the top 60 range, and these are all guys who have declared for the draft. So starting off, we got to say that the Lakers did a really good job last season with Austin Reeves, picking him up undrafted. He's a guy who's was a big spark for them, like I said, and I think they can do the same with a lot of these guys, or maybe some of these guys on this list right now. Cameron McGusty from Miami. He was a really big spark for Miami in the tournament. He was probably their best player in the March Madness run, and he was a really good scorer for them off the dribble. He's a 3-and-D type wing. He's a guy that can create off the dribble for himself, but in the NBA is probably going to be a spot up shooter, but he can also defend at a good level. Keon Ellis is probably one of the best wing defenders in the draft. And this is a guy who can, if he can start spacing the floor consistently, he can also be a really good 3-and-D type player. Another wing player for the Lakers. Julian Champagnie is another wing, but this guy's a straight bucket getter. So if you need a guy who can just score for himself, Julian Champagnie is one of the best scorers in the draft. Same with Johnny Juzang as well as Jamari Bouye, who are all guards, as well as Colin Gillespie, who's an outside shooter. If you want a big man, Kofi Cockburn from Illinois. Shout out to Kofi because I go to Illinois. This guy is a beast down low. If you need a guy who can just defend, protect the rim at an elite level, as well as just catch lobs and be a rim runner, Kofi Cockburn can be your guy. Kofi is a really big, strong player. And I do think that, if the Lakers need a center, Kofi's probably the guy who's probably not going to get drafted, in my opinion. I don't think any team's going to take Kofi in the top 60, so the Lakers could snag him undrafted. I'm pretty sure he also worked out with the Lakers as well. And then Hyunjung Lee out of Davidson is a guy who's just a straight shooter, man. These guys can just run off screens and just shoot for fun. And he's a perfect player to put alongside LeBron because, the amount of attention that LeBron's going to draw. If you just put him on the court next to him, he's going to get so many open looks and he can knock those down. So these are a lot of guys that, the Lakers can just look into. I don't know if they're going to sign any of them, but they're just guys that I would think majority of them will not be drafted. So we'll see what happens with the Lakers, but a lot of these guys I do think would fit the Lakers and their needs really well. Now moving on to free agency. First of all, I do think the Lakers should make it priority number one in free agency to try to re-sign Malik Monk because he was an absolute stud for them last season. They could probably use their mid-level exception on them, sign him to a 2-year deal worth $13.3 million. I think he did say that he wants to stay with the Lakers. I don't know if a team is probably going to offer him a bag or not, but the hope is for Malik Monk to come back to the Lakers. I think you should also re-sign Stanley Johnson, Carmelo, and Dwight on minimum contracts, 1 year, $2.3 million. And these are all in-house signings. I'll get to guys that can join the Lakers from a different team next season as well in the next slide. But as far as in-house signings are concerned, Malik Monk, Stanley Johnson, Carmelo, and Dwight, I do think that they should all be re-signed. As far as the coaching situation, I think Darvin Ham is the guy, and the reason is Darvin Ham is a no-nonsense type of character, and I do think that he fits exactly what the Lakers need. They need a guy who cannot be really pushed around, and that's going to set some authority in that locker room. They have a lot of egos, and I do think that Darvin Ham is a guy that can manage all of them. So Darvin Ham, I think, is the best candidate. I'm not a fan of Terry Stotts, and I do think that Kenny Atkinson is a coach that a lot of young developing teams would like, but I don't think he's a championship level coach that, if you want to turn a team from a developing team to a contender, I don't think Kenny Atkinson's your guy. I think Kenny Atkinson's a guy that a lot of young teams would like, but I don't think the Lakers really fit Kenny Atkinson. So I think Darvin Ham makes the most sense out of the three candidates, and I would really love him on the Lakers. So hopefully they go with him. As far as guys who can sign for the Lakers next year or after this season, there's a long list of players here. Obviously, they're not going to sign all of these, but these are all guys who could consider signing for the Lakers on the minimum. DeLon Wright, number one, I do think is a guy that the Lakers could go out and sign. I really like DeLon Wright. He was really good for Atlanta this season. I thought he was a good spark plug off the bench defensively. I think he's a stud, and I do think he's a hustle player. He's a guy that can get offensive rebounds off of missed shots, and he's just a guy who's a pest defensively, but he's also a hard worker and a gritty player. He'll do a lot of dirty work, and that's exactly the type of guys that the Lakers need. The Lakers have to stop name chasing and get guys who actually fit what they need, and DeLon Wright is a guy that I do think can fit the Lakers' needs. Same with Damian Jones, who's a center who's just going to do a lot of dirty work. He's just going to play his role, play hard. He knows what he does on the court. He's not going to play out of his role. Otto Porter Jr., as well as Gary Payton, two of the guys on the Warriors who have now reached the finals this season. Otto Porter fits the Lakers as a 3-and-D player. Gary Payton II is a guy who can hustle, play defense, get some steals, and be a really electric player in transition. And Gary Harris, another 3-and-D wing. Derrick Jones Jr., a really good wing defender who can switch on to multiple positions, as well as, has shown flashes of knocking down the three, but he's a high flyer. DeMarcus Cousins, who was a former Laker, he's shown, with the Nuggets that he still has a role for him in the NBA. Chris Dunn, who was a defensive pest, as well as a guy who can, fly in transition. And then TJ Warren, who I don't know if he's going to be on the minimum, but he's been injured these past couple of seasons. So maybe this is a guy that, it could be similar to a Kendrick Nunn or something like that, where they just sign with the Lakers because there's not really, they just want to compete for a championship and money is not really their priority. So, there's a theme with a lot of these guys, as you guys can see. They're all defensive first guys, except for probably TJ Warren and DeMarcus Cousins. A lot of these other guys are defensive first, and I do think that's what the Lakers need. They need defense on the wings primarily. I do think that guys like DeLon Wright, Gary Payton II, Gary Harris, Chris Dunn, Otto Porter, these guys are all defensive, specialists. Same with Derrick Jones Jr. and Damian Jones. Boogie and TJ Warren are guys who you can sign for offensive purposes as well, to space the floor and to create shots. But these are some signings that I think the Lakers should consider, in adding to their team in the offseason. And apart from that, the goals for next season are very simple. It's championship or bust. It's always championship or bust with this Lakers team. You want Anthony Davis to stay as healthy as possible. If you were to keep Russell Westbrook, you should, hope that another year of him on this team with better pieces around him and LeBron and AD can help him gel with the team better. More contributions from guys like, Austin Reeves, Malik Monk, as well as a jump from either an undrafted rookie signing or a free agent signing that you signed for a minimum contract to help the Lakers, like a Malik Monk and an Austin Reeves did last season. So it's very simple for the Lakers, man. I think this is a good kind of synopsis as to what they should do this season. Yeah, that's where we're gonna wrap up the video. Thank you guys all for watching. Make sure you guys leave a like, subscribe, and comment down below, and let me know what other teams you want me to do next. Like I said, I plan to do all 30, but I'm starting off with the Lakers because they've been on the news lately. So yeah, we're gonna wrap up the video here. Leave a like, subscribe, comment down below. I'll see y'all later. As always, peace.